The morning sunlight stretched gently across the sleek glass facade of the Kingston Emporium's flagship store, its polished windows reflecting the bustling streets of Chicago's Gold Coast. Inside, the air carried the quiet hum of commerce, the muffled rhythm of footsteps on marble, soft voices of employees offering assistance, and the faint rustle of shopping bags. Dr. Isabella Montgomery stepped through the automatic doors, the faint squeak of her sneakers punctuating her entrance. She was unassuming in her appearance: jeans, a loose blazer, and scuffed white running shoes that spoke more of practicality than fashion. Her hand rested lightly on the shoulder of her 6-year-old nephew, Liam, whose wide eyes took in the expanse of the store with a mix of awe and uncertainty. "Aunt Bella," he whispered, tugging at her hand. "Why is everyone staring?" Isabella followed his gaze, noticing for the first time the subtle but unmistakable shift in the atmosphere. Clerks paused mid-task, their gazes darting toward her before quickly averting. Behind the counters, employees exchanged whispers, their lips pressed into unreadable lines. A group of shoppers near the perfume display turned briefly, their expressions a blend of curiosity and unease. She bent down to Liam's height, her calm voice soft but firm. "Sometimes people stare because they don't know what they're seeing. But don't worry, we're not here for them." Liam nodded, reassured by her steady tone, and the two began walking through the aisles. Isabella's gaze swept across the store, taking in every detail: the neat rows of designer handbags, the perfectly arranged jewelry displays, the pristine floors polished to a mirror-like sheen. This was her routine, an unannounced visit to one of her stores to ensure they upheld the standards she demanded. Yet today, something felt off. They turned into the wine section, the cool air tinged with the faint aroma of aged oak and ripe grapes. Isabella paused in front of a carefully curated display of vintage bottles. One, in particular, caught her attention: a 2003 Chateau Margaux, its label slightly marred by an errant speck of dust. She reached out, brushing her thumb across the bottle. A voice sliced through the quiet, clipped and cold. "Ma'am, are you sure you want to touch that?" Isabella turned slowly. Standing before her was a woman in a neatly pressed blouse, her name tag reading Kara Whitfield, floor manager. Kara's smile was tight, her eyes sharp as they flicked from Isabella's hand to her attire. "Yes," Isabella said evenly, her voice carrying no hint of irritation. "Is there a problem?" "No problem," Kara replied, her tone suggesting the opposite. "It's just that some of our products are quite exclusive. We wouldn't want any accidents." From below, Liam's small voice piped up, indignant. Aunt Bella didn't do anything wrong. Isabella placed a calming hand on his shoulder and addressed Kara with quiet authority. "If I need assistance, I'll let you know." Kara hesitated, her smile faltering for a moment before she gave a curt nod. "Of course, ma'am. Please enjoy your shopping." As the manager retreated, Isabella exhaled slowly, her jaw tightening. She wasn't unfamiliar with moments like these: the veiled accusations, the unspoken doubts. They were small, often subtle reminders of a world where appearances often carried more weight than substance. But here, in her own store, the irony was sharper, the sting deeper. Liam tugged her hand, his earlier frustration already fading. "Can I get a candy bar?" She looked down, her expression softening. "Sure, let's go find one." The confectionery aisle was a riot of colors, every wrapper promising sweetness. Liam carefully selected a chocolate bar, clutching it in both hands as they made their way toward the checkout. But as they neared the exit, a piercing alarm shattered the calm. "Stop right there," Kara's voice rang out, sharp and triumphant. Isabella froze, her heart sinking as she glanced down at Liam, whose wide eyes brimmed with panic. In his hands, the candy bar trembled. "Aunt Bella," he whimpered, "I forgot to pay for it." Isabella knelt beside him, her voice steady despite the knot tightening in her chest. "It's okay, sweetheart. It's just a mistake." But Kara was already striding toward them, a uniformed security guard in tow. "Mistake or not, we take theft seriously here." A crowd began to gather, their murmurs rising as phones emerged from pockets, lenses aimed and recording. Isabella straightened, her composure intact, though her voice carried a quiet edge. "This is unnecessary. It's a misunderstanding. Nothing more. Kara crossed her arms, her expression smug. Policy is policy. Security will need to check your bags. And call the police. Liam began to cry, his small hands clutching Isabella's leg. Around them, whispers crackled like dry leaves. This is why people like them shouldn't shop here. Someone muttered. Isabella's gaze hardened, her calm exterior revealing the faintest spark of anger. She knelt once more, cupping Liam's tear-streaked face. You didn't do anything wrong. She whispered. Don't be scared. Everything will be fine. But even as she spoke, the sound of approaching sirens echoed through the store. Isabella rose slowly, her shoulders squared. They didn't know who she was. And they didn't care. Not yet. The store fell unnervingly silent, save for the alarm's shrill wail slicing through the air. Its mechanical rhythm felt almost accusatory, amplifying the unease that had already settled among the shoppers. Isabella Montgomery stood motionless, her nephew Liam clutching her leg with trembling hands, his small face buried in her blazer. From the corner of her eye, Isabella saw the crowd forming, their faces marked by curiosity, unease, and thinly veiled judgment. A middle-aged man in a crisp suit whispered something to his companion, who nodded solemnly. A woman with a toddler on her hip glanced at Isabella and quickly turned away. I didn't mean to, Liam whimpered. I'm sorry. Isabella knelt down, brushing his curls away from his tear-streaked cheeks. It's okay, Liam. You're not in trouble, she said gently, her voice a steady anchor in the storm brewing around them. We'll fix this. She straightened just as Kara Whitfield, the store manager, approached, her stride purposeful and her expression carrying a dangerous mix of authority and disdain. This is why we have policies, Kara said, her voice clipped. Behind her, a tall security guard loomed, his presence underscoring the gravity she wanted the moment to carry. Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside and let us inspect your belongings. Isabella met Kara's gaze evenly, her voice measured but firm. I already told you. It was an oversight. My nephew picked up a candy bar. And I didn't realize until now. Let's settle this at the register. And we'll be on our way. Kara crossed her arms, her smile thin. I don't think that's enough. Security protocols require us to inspect all bags in cases like this. We can't make exceptions. Around them, murmurs grew louder. Someone nearby muttered, if she didn't do anything wrong, why is she resisting? Isabella caught the comment but didn't flinch. Years of navigating spaces where she wasn't immediately welcomed had taught her to choose her battles carefully. This, however, felt different. She wasn't merely a shopper today, she was a lesson in the making. A spectacle for others to judge. The security guard stepped forward, his hand outstretched. Ma'am, your bag, please. Liam's quiet sobs broke the momentary stillness. And Isabella felt a pang of anger not just at the situation, but at the normalization of moments like these. How easily suspicion attached itself to certain people. How effortlessly the benefit of the doubt slipped away. You're accusing me of theft over a candy bar? Isabella asked, her tone calm but sharp. Kara's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. It's our policy, ma'am. Now, please cooperate, or I'll have to call the police. The words hung in the air, heavy and deliberate. Around them, the crowd grew thicker, phones raised and recording. A woman in her 40s whispered loudly to her companion. People like her are always looking for trouble. The knot in Isabella's stomach tightened, but her exterior remained composed. Liam clung to her leg, his tears dampening the fabric of her jeans. Ma'am, the security guard repeated, though his tone held less conviction now. I think we've done enough here. Isabella replied, her voice like steel wrapped in velvet. She turned to Kara. You can either resolve this quietly, or you can escalate it and deal with the consequences later. Kara hesitated, her confidence faltering for the briefest moment before she waved a hand dismissively at the guard. Call them, she said. Isabella inhaled slowly as the guard pulled out his radio. Somewhere beyond the glass storefront, faint sirens began to wail. Liam's grip on her leg tightened, and she crouched to meet his gaze once more. Listen to me, she said softly. You didn't do anything wrong. This isn't your fault. I need you to be brave for me. Okay? Liam sniffled, nodding as he wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. When the police arrived moments later, the store seemed to hold its collective breath. 2 officers entered, their boots clacking against the marble floor. The older of the 2, Detective Marcus Foster, carried himself with the weary authority of someone who had seen far too many days like this. His younger partner, Officer Jenna Thompson, followed, her hand hovering near her belt. "What's going on here?" Foster asked, his voice low and even. Kara stepped forward, her confidence fully restored in the presence of law enforcement. "We have a suspected theft," she said, gesturing toward Isabella. The alarm went off, and she refused to cooperate. Foster's eyes moved to Isabella, lingering for a moment before shifting to the trembling boy at her side. "Ma'am, I'll need to see some ID," he said. Isabella reached into her blazer pocket, pulling out her driver's license. She handed it over, her fingers steady. "You'll find everything is in order," she said calmly. Foster studied the ID, his brow furrowing slightly as he read the name. He glanced at her again, something flickering in his eyes, though his tone remained neutral. "Dr. Montgomery, is it? Can you tell me what happened here?" Isabella recounted the events succinctly, her voice steady and unyielding. "And this?" Foster asked, holding up the candy bar Liam still clutched tightly. "This was the cause of all this?" "Yes," Isabella replied, her eyes locking onto his. "That's all it was." Thompson returned from reviewing the security footage, handing a tablet to Foster. He watched the playback in silence, his expression hard to read. Finally, he looked up at Kara. "There's no evidence of theft beyond the candy bar," he said, "and from what I can see, it was unintentional." Kara's face flushed, her confidence faltering. "But Foster cut her off with a raised hand. "Ma'am, I think this situation has already been blown out of proportion." Turning to Isabella, he said, "Dr. Montgomery, I'm going to need you to come with us to file a report." "Standard procedure." Isabella's jaw tightened, the first crack in her composed exterior. "You can't be serious." "It's protocol," Foster replied, his tone apologetic but firm. Liam began to cry again, his small voice breaking through the tense silence. "Don't take her away." Isabella knelt one last time, holding his face in her hands. "I'll be back before you know it," she whispered, as she stood. Her gaze swept the crowd, now murmuring in hushed tones. They didn't know who she was. And in this moment, it didn't matter. To them, she was just another face. Another body to be judged, doubted, and dismissed. But as the officers escorted her toward the waiting squad car, Isabella's resolve hardened. They didn't know who she was. Not yet. The squad car moved through the city streets, its tires humming against the asphalt. Inside, Isabella Montgomery sat in silence, her hands cuffed lightly in front of her. The cuffs weren't tight enough to hurt, but their presence was a quiet insult, a reminder of how quickly the world could shift beneath her feet. Detective Marcus Foster sat in the passenger seat, his gaze fixed forward, the faint lines on his face betraying a weariness that went beyond the moment. Beside Isabella, Officer Jenna Thompson glanced back through the rearview mirror from time to time, her expression unreadable. Outside the window, the familiar rhythm of Chicago unfolded, the blur of pedestrians on busy sidewalks, the soft glow of streetlights flickering to life against the late afternoon sky. But for Isabella, it might as well have been another world. Her mind was elsewhere, replaying the scene at the store. Liam's tearful face haunted her thoughts, his small hands clutching her blazer, his trembling voice asking if she was going to be taken away. She had assured him it would be okay, but the certainty in her voice had been for his sake, not hers. The car slowed as they approached the precinct, the building's dull, gray exterior blending into the cityscape. Isabella took a deep breath, steeling herself. "You'll follow me inside, ma'am," Foster said as he stepped out of the car, opening her door. His tone was courteous but firm. Isabella nodded, exiting the vehicle with quiet composure. The station's fluorescent lights cast a harsh, sterile glow on the worn tiles and scuffed walls. Officers moved briskly through the halls, their footsteps echoing faintly. Isabella caught glimpses of curious stares as she was led past desks cluttered with paperwork and coffee cups. They stopped outside a small interrogation room. Foster pushed the door open, motioning for her to enter. She stepped inside and sat at the metal table. Her movements deliberate, her expression calm. The room was sparse: 3 chairs, a table, and a mirror that reflected her image back at her. She knew someone was watching from the other side. Foster lingered in the doorway. "Wait here," he said, his tone neutral. Isabella nodded again, her eyes following him as he closed the door behind him. For a moment, she allowed herself to exhale, the sound barely audible in the empty room. She straightened her posture, folding her hands on the table. The quiet was oppressive, pressing against her chest like a weight. But she didn't fidget or pace. Instead, she waited, her mind piecing together her next steps with methodical precision. The door opened again, this time admitting Officer Jenna Thompson. She carried a notepad and pen, her face calm but detached. She sat across from Isabella, flipping the notepad open and clicking her pen. "Dr. Montgomery," Thompson began, her tone formal. "Can you walk me through what happened today?" "I've already explained it," Isabella replied evenly. Her voice betrayed no anger, only clarity. "I was shopping with my nephew. He picked up a candy bar and walked past the register without realizing it. That's all." Thompson tilted her head slightly, her pen hovering over the notepad. "And the wine bottle? The Chateau Margaux?" "I was examining it," Isabella said firmly. "I never removed it from the shelf." Thompson tapped her pen against the table. "You understand how this looks, don't you?" Isabella leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. "Yes, Officer Thompson, I understand exactly how this looks. A black woman in casual clothes with a child in tow is automatically suspect. That's what this is about, isn't it?" For a brief moment, Thompson's pen paused mid-tap. She didn't respond, but the silence spoke volumes. Before the exchange could continue, the door opened once more. Foster entered, a file in his hand, and took a seat beside Thompson. He placed the file on the table, flipping it open. "The store manager, Kara Whitfield, has provided her statement," he said, his tone neutral. "She claims you resisted inspection and became belligerent when asked to comply." Isabella's lips pressed into a thin line. "I refuse because the accusation was baseless and a violation of my rights. And I raised my voice only when it became clear that I was being treated unfairly." Foster studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "Do you expect us to believe this was all a misunderstanding?" "That's exactly what it was," Isabella replied, her voice steady. "And if you had verified my identity instead of treating me like a common criminal, you'd already know that." The tension in the room was palpable, stretching like an invisible thread. Before either officer could respond, there was a sharp knock at the door. A younger officer poked his head inside, his expression flustered. "Detective Foster," he said quickly, "you might want to come outside." Foster frowned but stood, gesturing for Thompson to stay. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving Isabella and Thompson alone. Thompson studied Isabella for a moment, her gaze thoughtful but cautious. "You're very calm for someone in your position," she said quietly. Isabella met her eyes, her voice unwavering. "I've had years of practice." The door swung open again, and Foster returned, his expression noticeably tenser. Behind him stepped a sharply dressed man in a tailored suit. His polished shoes clicked against the tiles as he entered the room with an air of authority. "Dr. Montgomery," the man said, his voice smooth but firm. "Are you all right?" Recognition flickered in Isabella's eyes. "Elliot," she said softly, relief washing over her. Elliot Grayson, her attorney, turned his attention to Foster and Thompson. "I trust you've realized the gravity of your mistake." Foster opened his mouth to respond, but Elliot cut him off. "You've detained the CEO of Kingston Emporium under baseless accusations, subjected her to public humiliation, and violated her civil rights. I suggest you release her immediately." The room seemed to hold its breath. Isabella watched silently as Elliot dismantled their rationale with precision, his voice calm but cutting. Moments later, Foster sighed heavily. "We'll release her," he said, his tone resigned. As the cuffs were removed, Isabella flexed her wrists slightly, her gaze never wavering. She rose to her full height, her composure intact. Thank you, detective, she said, her tone steady but edged with steel. But this isn't over. Outside the precinct, the sun had dipped lower, casting long shadows across the city streets. Isabella stepped into the waiting car, Elliot sliding in beside her. They'll regret this, Elliot said, his voice low but resolute. Isabella didn't respond immediately, her gaze fixed on the horizon. When she finally spoke, her words were calm but carried the weight of a storm. They already do, she said softly. They just don't know it yet. The quiet hum of the car's engine filled the space as Isabella sat in the back seat, her gaze fixed on the passing streets of Chicago. The familiar skyline, its jagged peaks of glass and steel, glowed softly in the waning light. It was a city she loved, a city she had contributed to with her business, her vision. Yet, today it had felt like a stranger, a cold, indifferent entity where judgment lingered just beneath the surface. Elliot Grayson sat beside her, his phone buzzing intermittently as he fielded calls and coordinated with his team. Though his voice remained calm and controlled, the subtle tension in his brow betrayed his anger. Maria is with Liam, Elliot said, breaking the silence. He's upset, but she's keeping him distracted. Isabella nodded faintly, her lips pressed into a thin line. The weight of the day hung heavily on her shoulders, but her mind was already moving forward, calculating the next steps. The car pulled up to her home, a modern structure of glass and steel perched on the edge of the city. Warm light spilled from the windows, and Maria Lynn, Isabella's trusted CFO, stood at the entrance. Her expression was a mix of relief and concern. As Isabella stepped inside, the smell of fresh tea greeted her. Liam rushed toward her, his small arms wrapping tightly around her waist. "Aunt Bella," he cried, burying his face in her blazer. She knelt to his level, her hands gently stroking his hair. "I'm here, sweetheart," she said softly. "Everything's okay now." Maria waited until Liam had calmed before speaking. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice careful. "I'm fine," Isabella replied, her tone leaving little room for further questions. "But we need to talk." The three of them moved to Isabella's private office, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of the city's glittering lights. Isabella sat behind her desk, her posture straight, her hands folded neatly. "This can't go unaddressed," she began, her voice steady but firm. "What happened today wasn't just about me. It's about the system that allowed it to happen." Elliot leaned forward, his elbows resting on the desk. "You're right, but how far are you prepared to take this? A public apology from the precinct? A lawsuit?" "Both," Isabella said without hesitation. "But that's not enough. This is bigger than one incident. This is about the culture within my own company." Maria's brow furrowed. "Your company? Isabella, you've built one of the most inclusive brands in the country." "And yet," Isabella said, her voice soft but cutting, "the manager in my own flagship store saw me, a black woman in casual clothes, and decided I didn't belong. That speaks to a failure in our training. Our values, everything we claim to stand for." Maria nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. "What do you propose?" "A complete overhaul," Isabella replied. "Mandatory diversity training for every employee, from the sales floor to the executive suite. Clear protocols for customer interactions that prioritize respect and fairness. And a platform for employees and customers to voice their concerns without fear of retaliation." "That's ambitious," Elliot said. "You'll face pushback from the board, the employees, maybe even the public." "I know," Isabella said, her gaze steady, "but this isn't negotiable. If we lose customers or investors over this, so be it. I'd rather run a smaller company with integrity than a larger one built on hypocrisy." Maria exchanged a glance with Elliot before nodding. "All right, where do we start? Blank. Blank. The following morning, Isabella convened an emergency meeting with her senior leadership team. The conference room, with its sleek modern design and panoramic city views, buzzed with quiet murmurs as executives filed in. When Isabella entered, the room fell silent. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice calm but commanding. "As you're aware, I was involved in an incident yesterday that has since gone public. While I wish it hadn't happened, It has forced me to confront some uncomfortable truths about our company. She paused, letting her words settle. For years, we've claimed to stand for inclusivity and integrity. Yesterday, I saw those values falter in one of our own stores. That ends today. The room remained quiet, the weight of her words hanging heavy. I've outlined a plan for restructuring our company's culture. She continued, gesturing to Maria, who began distributing folders. This includes mandatory diversity training, revised hiring strategies to ensure greater representation, and new protocols for customer interactions. Antoine Rousseau, the head of marketing, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. With all due respect, Dr. Montgomery, isn't this an overreaction to an isolated incident? Isolated? Isabella's gaze sharpened. How many customers have walked into our stores and felt the same judgment I did? How many employees have faced similar biases from their colleagues? If we don't address this, we're complicit. Another executive, Sophie Durant, raised a hand. What about the financial impact? These changes won't be cheap. And the board will have concerns. Let them, Isabella said bluntly. If the board isn't willing to invest in doing the right thing, they're free to step aside. The room fell silent again, the weight of her conviction settling over the table. Maria spoke next, her voice steady. This won't be easy, but it's necessary. If we're going to make these changes, we need everyone on board. Slowly, heads began to nod. The initial resistance softened, replaced by a tentative sense of determination. Isabella allowed herself a small smile. Then let's get to work. Blank. Blank. Over the next few days, the Kingston Emporium began its transformation. Employees attended workshops led by experts in equity and inclusion, while managers received new training on fostering respectful environments. Policies were rewritten, and an internal platform was launched to encourage open dialogue. The response was mixed. While many employees embraced the changes, others resisted, their skepticism evident in the murmurs and side conversations that lingered in the hallways. Isabella was undeterred. She visited stores, spoke directly with employees, and listened to their concerns. She knew change would be slow, and resistance was inevitable, but she also knew it was worth it. One afternoon, during a visit to a pilot store, a young cashier approached her hesitantly. Dr. Montgomery, the cashier said, her voice trembling slightly, I just wanted to say thank you for standing up for people like me. Isabella felt a lump rise in her throat. She smiled warmly. Thank you for being here. You're part of this change. As she left the store, the faint sound of a customer's laughter reached her ears. It was a small moment, but it carried a weight of its own, a reminder of what was possible when dignity and respect were prioritized. The road ahead was long, but Isabella felt a quiet certainty that they were moving in the right direction. Change, she knew, wasn't easy, but it was always worth it. The Kingston Emporium headquarters buzzed with activity, but beneath the surface, tension simmered. Changes were underway, and while some employees welcomed the new direction, others resisted, their unease rippling through the company like a quiet undercurrent. Isabella Montgomery sat in her office, her gaze focused on the city skyline. Papers were spread across her desk, reports, emails, and proposals detailing the progress of the initiatives she'd announced. The air was heavy with the weight of what had been set in motion. Maria Lynn entered, her expression guarded as she held a tablet against her chest. We've received some pushback, she began, closing the door behind her. Isabella looked up, her face unreadable. From whom? Maria handed her the tablet, which displayed a list of names. A few mid-level managers, some longtime employees. They're circulating a petition claiming the new policies are unnecessary and divisive. Isabella studied the list, her brow furrowing slightly. She recognized many of the names employees who had been with the company for years. Some since the beginning. They've framed it as a call for tradition. Maria continued, they're saying the changes go against what made Kingston Emporium successful in the first place. Isabella set the tablet down and leaned back in her chair. Tradition, she repeated, her tone quiet but sharp. A convenient word for maintaining the status quo. Maria hesitated before speaking again. There's more. A few of them have taken their grievances public. Anonymous posts online. Interviews with small business blogs, nothing major yet. But it's gaining traction. Isabella exhaled slowly, the weight of the situation settling over her. What are they saying? That the company is alienating its core demographic. Maria said. That these changes are performative, driven by a single incident rather than a genuine need. Isabella's lips pressed into a thin line. And the board? Mixed reactions. Maria admitted. Some are concerned about the backlash. But others see the value in what we're doing. It's a delicate balance. Isabella nodded thoughtfully, her fingers tapping lightly against the edge of her desk. Schedule a meeting with the dissenting managers. She said finally. I want to hear their concerns directly. Maria's eyebrows lifted slightly in surprise. Are you sure? It could get heated. Good. Isabella replied. It's time for an honest conversation. Blank. Blank. The meeting was scheduled for the following afternoon in one of the company's smaller conference rooms. The air was thick with unease as the dissenting managers filed in. Their expressions guarded. Isabella stood at the head of the table, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to the tension in the room. Thank you all for coming. She began, her voice measured. I understand that many of you have concerns about the changes we're implementing. This is your opportunity to share them openly. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Greg, a store manager with over a decade of experience, cleared his throat. With all due respect, Dr. Montgomery, these policies feel forced. They're creating division where there wasn't any before. Isabella met his gaze evenly. Division, Greg? Or accountability? Greg shifted uncomfortably. Our customers love the way things were. We've built relationships with them over the years. Now we're being told to change everything to rethink how we interact with people. It feels like we're being punished for things we didn't do. Isabella let his words settle before responding. I understand how you feel. She said calmly. Change is uncomfortable. But tell me, Greg, how do you think our other customers felt before these policies? The ones who walked into our stores and didn't feel welcome because of how they looked or spoke. Did we ever consider their discomfort? Greg hesitated, his expression faltering. I guess I never thought about it that way. That's the problem, Isabella said gently but firmly. For years, we've prioritized the comfort of some at the expense of others. These changes aren't about punishment. They're about ensuring that everyone, employees and customers alike, feels valued and respected. Another manager spoke up, her voice tinged with frustration. But what if this alienates our loyal customers? What if they stop coming because they don't agree with these changes? Isabella turned to her, her expression thoughtful. Then perhaps they weren't as loyal as we thought. True loyalty isn't about agreeing with every decision we make. It's about trusting that we're doing what's right. The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging heavy. Slowly, the resistance began to soften. Blank. Over the next few weeks, Isabella continued to face challenges. Online criticism grew louder, with some claiming that the company's efforts were nothing more than a publicity stunt. A group of employees staged a brief walkout, holding signs that read, "Tradition matters," and "Stop the division." Yet for every voice of dissent, there was a voice of support. Customers shared stories of positive experiences in the revamped stores, and employees who had initially resisted began to embrace the changes. One evening, as Isabella reviewed the latest reports in her office, she received an email from a longtime employee, Dr. Montgomery. It read, "I was skeptical at first. But now I see the difference these changes are making. You've inspired me to be better. Not just at work but in life. Thank you." Isabella sat back in her chair, her eyes scanning the words again. It was a small moment, but it carried a profound weight, a reminder of why she had taken on this fight. Change, she knew, was rarely easy. It was met with fear, resistance, and doubt, but it was also necessary. A bridge between what was and what could be. As she looked out at the city lights, Isabella felt a quiet resolve. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but she was prepared to walk it. Not just for herself, but for everyone who deserved to be seen, heard, and respected. The seeds of change had been planted. Now, it was time to help them grow. Morning light filtered through the tall windows of the Kingston Emporium headquarters, casting soft shadows across the conference room. Isabella Montgomery stood at the head of the table, her hands resting lightly on a stack of neatly prepared documents. Around her, members of her senior leadership team listened intently, their expressions a mixture of resolve and fatigue. It's been a challenging few weeks. Isabella began, her voice steady but reflective. We've faced resistance, both within our organization and from the public. But we've also seen progress, real, tangible progress. The question now is, how do we sustain it? Maria Lynn, seated to Isabella's right, nodded thoughtfully. The changes are starting to resonate with employees. The training sessions are making an impact, even among those who were skeptical at first. But there's still pushback, especially from certain senior staff. Elliot Grayson leaned forward, his tone measured. Externally, the narrative is beginning to shift. Positive stories about the company are gaining traction. But the critics haven't disappeared. If we falter now, they'll be ready to pounce. Isabella looked around the room, her gaze calm but unyielding. We can't afford to falter, she said. This isn't just about our reputation. It's about creating a culture that reflects the values we claim to stand for. That means addressing every concern, every challenge, head on. Blank. Blank. Later that day, Isabella visited one of the flagship stores downtown, a location that had been at the center of the changes. The atmosphere was markedly different from her last visit. Employees greeted customers with genuine smiles, and the subtle tension that once hung in the air seemed to have dissipated. She approached Angela, the store manager, who looked both proud and nervous. Dr. Montgomery, Angela said, extending a hand. It's an honor to have you here again. Thank you, Angela, Isabella replied, shaking her hand. How are things going? Angela hesitated, then smiled. Better than I expected. Some of the staff were hesitant at first, but the training sessions have helped. We've had some tough conversations, but it feels like we're turning a corner. As they walked through the store, Isabella observed the changes firsthand. A young cashier patiently assisted an elderly customer at the checkout line, her tone warm and attentive. Across the aisle, two employees of different backgrounds worked side by side, their collaboration seamless. A middle-aged man approached Isabella hesitantly, a shopping bag in his hand. Excuse me, Dr. Montgomery, he said, his voice tinged with emotion. Yes, she replied, turning to face him. I just wanted to say thank you, he said, his eyes earnest. For the first time, I feel welcome here. It means more than I can put into words. Isabella smiled warmly, her chest tightening slightly. Thank you for sharing that. It's people like you who remind us why this work matters. Blank. Blank. That evening, back at headquarters, Isabella reviewed a report from Maria. It highlighted steady improvements in customer satisfaction and employee engagement, but also noted lingering resistance among a small faction of employees. One line stood out. There's still work to be done. Isabella set the report aside and gazed out the window. The city lights shimmered against the night sky, a quiet reminder of the world beyond her office. Her thoughts drifted to Liam, whose innocent question in the store had sparked a fire she hadn't realized was still burning within her. Why are they staring at us? He had asked. The answer, Isabella knew, was both simple and complex. The world wasn't always kind to those who didn't fit its narrow expectations. But it could change. It had to. Blank. The following week, Isabella convened a town hall meeting with employees across the organization. The largest auditorium in the building was filled to capacity, the air buzzing with a mix of curiosity and tension. Isabella stood at the podium, her calm demeanor commanding the room's attention. Thank you all for being here, she began. I know the past few weeks haven't been easy. Change rarely is. But I want to be clear. These changes are not a reaction to one incident. They're a response to a broader issue, one that affects not just our company, but our society as a whole. She paused, scanning the room. For years, Kingston Emporium has prided itself on being a leader in retail. But leadership isn't just about profit margins or customer loyalty. It's about setting an example. It's about creating an environment where everyone, regardless of who they are or where they come from, feels valued. A man in the back raised his hand. With all due respect, Dr. Montgomery, Why are we changing something that wasn't broken? Isabella met his gaze evenly. Because it was broken, she said, not in a way that was obvious to everyone, but in ways that mattered deeply to those who were affected. If we want to grow not just as a company, but as individuals, we have to acknowledge those cracks and work to repair them. Another employee stood, her voice hesitant but firm. I didn't understand these changes at first. But after the training sessions, I realized how much I had overlooked. Thank you for pushing us to do better. Isabella nodded, her expression softening. That's the point of all this. Not to assign blame, but to learn, to grow, and to create a better future together. Blank. Blank. As the meeting ended, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The initial skepticism gave way to a tentative sense of understanding. Isabella knew it wasn't a complete victory. True change would take time, but it was a step in the right direction. That night, as she prepared to leave her office, Isabella received an email from a customer. Dr. Montgomery. It read, I wanted to thank you for what you're doing. My daughter recently started working at one of your stores. And for the first time, she feels seen and valued. You've made a difference in her life and in ours. Isabella leaned back in her chair, the words sinking in. They were a reminder of why she had taken on this challenge, not for the accolades or the headlines, but for the people who had been overlooked for far too long. Change, she knew, wasn't about grand gestures. It was about the quiet, steady work of building something better. And that work was only just beginning. The air outside the Kingston Emporium headquarters carried the crisp promise of autumn. The streets bustling with the muted energy of a city settling into the season. Inside, Isabella Montgomery prepared for a day that would test both her resolve and the resilience of the changes she had put into motion. The agenda was full. Meetings with employees, media interviews, and, most significantly, a community roundtable. The roundtable was part of the company's new initiative, a forum designed to hear from customers and employees about their experiences and concerns. Maria Lynn entered Isabella's office, a tablet tucked under one arm. The roundtable is set, she said, her tone calm but cautious. We've invited a mix of voices, supporters of the new policies, skeptics, and a few community leaders. It could get lively. Isabella smiled faintly, her fingers steepling as she considered Maria's words. Lively is good. It means people care enough to engage. Maria hesitated. You'll need to address the walkout. Some employees are still upset. And they'll want answers. I'm ready, Isabella replied simply. Blank. Blank. The roundtable was held in the company's largest conference room, its walls lined with framed photographs depicting Kingston Emporium's history. At the center of the room, a long oval table was surrounded by a diverse group of participants, employees, customers, and community representatives. Isabella entered quietly, her presence commanding attention without demanding it. Thank you all for being here, she began, her voice steady. This isn't just a conversation about Kingston Emporium. It's about who we are as individuals, as a company, and as a society. I want this to be an open dialogue, no scripts, no judgment, just honesty. For a moment, the room was silent. Then Greg, the store manager who had led the walkout weeks earlier, spoke up. With respect, Dr. Montgomery, he began, his tone firm but measured. A lot of us feel like these changes were forced on us without our input. We've been with this company for years, and suddenly it feels like everything we built is being questioned. Isabella nodded, her expression thoughtful. I understand why it might feel that way, she said, but let me ask you this: when was the last time we questioned the comfort of those who felt excluded in our stores? When did we stop to consider the experiences of customers or employees who didn't fit the mold of who we thought belonged here? Greg hesitated, his gaze dropping to the table. A young cashier, seated across from him, spoke up. I used to feel like I didn't belong, she said softly. I never said anything because I thought no one would care. But these changes, they've made me feel seen for the first time. The room grew quiet as her words settled. From the other side of the table, a middle-aged customer chimed in. I've been shopping at Kingston Emporium for years, she said. At first, I didn't understand these new policies. But the last time I came in, an employee went out of their way to help me. They didn't look at me like I didn't belong. That's never happened before. So whatever you're doing, it's working. Greg glanced at the customer, his expression softening. I never thought about it that way, he admitted. Blank. Underscore. Blank. As the discussion continued, voices from all sides of the issue shared their perspectives. Skeptics voiced their concerns about the potential loss of customers. Supporters shared stories of how the changes had already made a difference. Isabella listened intently, addressing each point with the same calm, deliberate tone. This isn't about erasing the past, she said at one point. It's about building on it. We can honor what this company has achieved while also acknowledging where we fell short and striving to do better. The room nodded in quiet agreement, the tension beginning to dissolve into something softer understanding. Perhaps, or at least the beginnings of it. Blank. Underscore. Blank. Later that evening, Isabella stood in her office, gazing out at the city lights. The day had been exhausting but productive. The conversations at the round table had been difficult at times, but they had also been necessary. Maria entered, holding a cup of tea. You handled that well, she said, setting the cup on Isabella's desk. Thank you, Isabella replied, her tone reflective. But it's just the start. The real work begins now, turning those conversations into action. Maria nodded. It's already happening. The dissent is quieter. People are starting to see the value in what we're doing. Isabella took a sip of the tea, the warmth grounding her. Change is slow, she said, but every step forward matters. No matter how small. Blank. Underscore. Blank. That night, as she prepared to leave the office, Isabella received a message from Greg. Dr. Montgomery. It read, I wanted to thank you for listening today. I may not agree with everything, but I see now why this matters. I'm ready to help. Isabella smiled faintly, her heart lifting slightly. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was progress. And progress, she knew, was enough to keep moving forward. As she stepped outside, the crisp autumn air greeted her, carrying with it the quiet hum of the city. The path ahead would be long, but Isabella felt ready. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to hope not just for Kingston Emporium, but for what it could inspire in others. The work was far from over, but it was work worth doing. The sun rose quietly over Chicago, casting a soft golden hue across the glass facade of Kingston Emporium's headquarters. Inside, Isabella Montgomery stood in a conference room overlooking the city. The space was silent but brimming with unspoken anticipation. Today marked the culmination of weeks of effort, reflection, and transformation, a moment she hoped would redefine not just her company, but the conversations surrounding it. Maria Lynn and Elliot Grayson joined her, their expressions serious but steady. Maria set a folder on the table, her voice breaking the silence. Everything is ready. The announcement, the press release, the timeline, it's all in place. And the employees? Isabella asked, turning to face her team. They've been briefed, Maria replied. Most are on board, some are still hesitant, but I think they'll come around once they see the bigger picture. Elliot leaned against the edge of the table, his arms crossed. The board is watching closely. They know the stakes, but they also know what this could mean for the company's future. Isabella nodded, her gaze distant for a moment before she refocused. This isn't just about the company. It's about setting a standard, showing what's possible when we lead with integrity. Blank. Underscore. Blank. Later that morning, Isabella addressed her employees via a live broadcast from the company's auditorium. Her tone was calm, measured, and deliberate, each word chosen to resonate without theatrics. Good morning, she began, her voice steady as her image appeared on screens across Kingston Emporium locations nationwide. Over the past several weeks, we've embarked on a journey not just as a company, but as individuals. It's been challenging, uncomfortable, and, at times, divisive, but it's also been necessary. She paused, her gaze scanning the room and the cameras beyond it. When I founded Kingston Emporium, I envisioned a place where everyone felt welcome, a brand that represented excellence and inclusivity. But I've come to realize that vision hasn't reached every corner of our organization. For that, I take responsibility. A ripple of silence followed her words, the weight of her admission settling over the audience. Today, we take another step forward. She continued. We're introducing a comprehensive initiative that will transform how we operate. This includes ongoing training, revised policies, and new opportunities for employees to shape the future of this company. Our goal is simple: to create an environment where respect is the foundation of everything we do. The room remained quiet as Isabella's words hung in the air. Then, slowly, a wave of applause began, spreading from the front rows to the back. Blank. Blank. In the days that followed, the initiative began to take shape. Workshops were expanded to include not just employees, but community members and partners. A mentorship program connected senior staff with younger employees from diverse backgrounds, fostering relationships that bridged gaps in understanding. The changes weren't without challenges. A handful of employees chose to leave, citing discomfort with the company's new direction. Some customers, too, voiced their disapproval, their loyalty rooted in an ideal of the past. But for every loss, there was a gain. Applications for positions at Kingston Emporium surged, with candidates citing the company's values as their motivation. Sales in pilot stores implementing the changes began to climb steadily. One afternoon, Isabella visited a store on the city's south side, an area historically underserved by major retailers. The space buzzed with life, customers browsing, employees engaging warmly, a sense of community weaving through the aisles. As she observed quietly, a young employee approached her. "Dr. Montgomery," she said, her voice tentative but filled with admiration. "I just wanted to say thank you. This job, it's the first place I've felt like I could truly be myself." "That means more than I can say." Isabella smiled, her heart swelling with quiet pride. "Thank you," she replied. "It's people like you who make this all worthwhile." Blank. That evening, back in her office, Isabella reflected on the journey so far. Her phone buzzed with a message from Greg, the once skeptical store manager. "Dr. Montgomery," it read, "I've been thinking about what you said during the roundtable. You were right, it's not about erasing the past. It's about building on it. I'm proud to be part of this future." Isabella set the phone down, her thoughts drifting. The path to this moment had been fraught with resistance, but also marked by quiet victories, moments of understanding, connection, and growth. She rose and stepped to the window, the city stretching out before her in a sea of lights. The challenges weren't over. There would always be those who resisted change, who clung to the comfort of what had been. But Isabella was no stranger to perseverance. Kingston Emporium wasn't just a business, it was a reflection of the world she believed in, a world where respect and dignity were not privileges, but rights. As the city hummed softly below, Isabella allowed herself a moment of stillness. The work would continue, but for now, she felt the quiet satisfaction of knowing they were moving in the right direction. And that was enough. For now, it was enough.